The State of the Database in 2025 with Ryan Booz.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast and deliver quality and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a full-service software architecture and engineering firm that serves companies using .NET and Azure and the entire Microsoft platform. We build mission-critical software and rescue failing projects, always empowering software delivery with a proven approach. And I'm excited to announce that my latest book is now fully released. This book is about software leadership. It's called The 5 Pillars: Leadership for Effective Custom Software. And it's available in hardcover, paperback, Kindle, and audiobook. And the book is for anyone who's attempting to make a custom software team highly effective. If you want your team to deliver world-class results, this book could be for you, for team leads, managers, or software executives that are overseeing software teams. And teams are also doing book studies and discussions around it. And we have a book study guide. I'm excited about that. And so if you, dear listener, would like a complimentary electronic copy of the book, then just send me an email and I'll get it to you. And we also have some promo codes for free versions of the Audible audiobook version. And also for those of you who are in a lead architect or software executive role, you might be interested in joining our monthly interactive forums. These are deeply technical sessions that I enjoy facilitating myself. These are conversations. These are meetings with others of your peers in the industry. You can sign up for those on clearmeasure.com. My returning guest today on the show is Ryan Booz, and he's returning from episode 295 and 245, excuse me. And he's an advocate at Redgate, focusing on PostgreSQL, and he's been working as a PostgreSQL advocate, developer, DBA, and product manager for more than 20 years, primarily working with time series data on Postgres and the Microsoft data platform. He's also a longtime DBA, starting with MySQL in Postgres in the late 90s, and he spent more than 15 years working with SQL Server before returning to Postgres full-time in 2018. And he's at the top of his game when he's learning something new about the data platform or teaching others about the technology he loves. Ryan, welcome back to the podcast. So great to see you. How are you, sir?
We're doing well. So glad to be here, Jeff. I appreciate the opportunity to catch up and talk about where we are in 2025.
That's right. That's right. Happy New Year. It's our first episode recording of the new year. And a lot of things happening, and
same to you.
At Redgate, lots of great announcements last year. Before I jump into that, I always like to ask our guests, to kind of go back in time a little bit, because there's new listeners all the time who didn't hear your previous episode or haven't seen you present live at conferences or recordings, and so kind of going back, you're primarily you're focused on database and hardcore specialist. Was there a turning point in your career that kind of pushed you in this direction and said, you know what, I think I'm a database guy, and I think I'm this kind of database guy, and you just kept the love for it?
That's a great question. I think I can't believe how, it's been a year and a half since that episode. I can't believe how quickly time flies. So I don't remember exactly what I shared. My actual background in my undergrad degree was, I was headed towards computer engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And for various reasons, I ended up with a music degree instead.
Nice.
And I actually taught for a couple of years, but never left the computer game. And just started as actually in teaching. I was teaching at a small private school, and they just had a lot of need to have technology, and this was in the late 90s, and trying to, better our processes just around managing students and managing stuff. It's money was tight. And so I dug in even further. I'd had a lot of development background in the early 90s, even, in school and so forth. And I just realized like, oh, databases are like the thing I need to understand more. And so I think it was 98, maybe I really dug into, actually earlier in that, I dug into MySQL and just really got the bug for it. I really just the organization of a relational database just has always intrigued me, and the way to enhance it, to make it work better, to figure out how to do exactly what it needs to do the best way it can, and the ins and outs of whether it's indexing or query planning or the way the storage of data is. And so just because it was kind of always there, and I went around, I did a lot of management and development and so forth. And I really, it's funny, next week, this is beginning of January, next week, I'll be going to CodeMash 2025 in Ohio. And CodeMash has been, it's about a 4-hour drive for me. I'm in Pennsylvania. And so I've been going out there for, I don't remember when the first time was, maybe 2013, 14, something like that. I can't remember exactly when. And so we had been doing a lot of work with SQL Server and the data platform of the company I'd been at for quite some time. But there was always these couple database things that always bugged us. And I had some folks that have been in the game for a long time, but just couldn't get around it. And so this is a plug for just conference in general. So I went to the conference and I happened to do a half-day training. It finished early. And so I was walking down the hallway and I saw there was this guy still had an hour left in his session about SQL Server. It's like, oh, maybe I should sit down.
Yeah.
So I go in, I sit down on the back wall, kind of sit on the floor. The room is packed. And within 5 minutes, he brings up trace flag 2371 or 2731. Now I forget exactly what it is, but I think it's 2371. In SQL Server is a 2005. And it was a trace flag that increases the frequency at which statistics are calculated, right? So that was our big issue, was around query planning. We can never get a hold of this time series data that's increasing, but statistics are always out of date, and we just didn't understand why. And as he talked about it, that was the moment for me. So we're talking now 12, 13 years ago, that I was like, oh, there's so much more to learn about this technology than just SQL and writing queries and query planning and trying to understand how to set up the log files. And like, there's so much more here. And that really kind of lit the fire into me. So I invested in SQL Server for a long time, and I took a job thinking I was going to be doing big data. I finally left the company I've been with for 15 years and excited to do big time, real time data analytics on the Microsoft platform. And I showed up after a month of, giving my old company some time, and they forgot to tell me they were switching to Postgres.
Oh.
So I showed up and SQL Server was gone. And I was like, oh, shoot, what do I do now? That's just kind of where we started. And so, I just decided it took me a while, but I realized it was the same thing. There's so much to know and learn, and the community is just as rich in a different way. And so once I could understand that, I'm thankful that I get to be in a place now. It's something I've wanted to do for a long time, that I get to help people understand how to use something like this better. Because I love learning it and I love helping. So, yeah, it's funny how that one little thing happens. I don't know what would have happened if I would have walked by that room at CodeMash all those years ago, but I didn't. And it really just intrigued me to the point of saying, oh, there's something more here that not a lot of people care about, but I do. I'm excited to learn more. So.
Well, I think everybody cares about it, but there's some people that say, I just need it to work. I just need it to work.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, of course, everyone wants it to work, but I think, we spent so many years saying there's the full stack engineer, and there are a few people I've met that are amazing full stack engineers. I don't know how they do it, but the reality is, whatever your technology is, there's a need to have those specialists. And data, it doesn't matter how many years we go, doesn't matter how simple the SQL language seems to be, and it's been around for 50 plus years. It's just nuance, right? There's just more, and it's great. I'm glad that there are people that care, and they want to dig deeper in that area, right? Not what the latest JavaScript framework is. And
right.
I don't know. I gave up on that a long time ago. So,
and you mentioned full stack. the full stack keeps on growing. And so to truly be full stack, you're a pretty broad generalist. It's just super hard to actually be a deep specialist in anything when you're focusing on actually covering and being generally useful at the full stack.
100%. I totally agree with you. And I think that's something we still don't fully grasp. Now you're talking about just deployment methods to Kubernetes, and whether it's microservices and all, like, you keep dividing up how you develop the same kind of application into all these pieces, and it's either going to grow efficiently or it's going to grow through fits. And I think oftentimes when we get too general, it grows to the point of not being able to manage it, and then we kind of step back and we find a new way and we try and improve it. So, yeah.
Well, for years and years, the conversation about a database started with the cost of licensing, and when you had to do it on premise. Okay, let me build this cluster, and what kind of hardware, and I have to pay per CPU for just the privilege of starting up this product and installing it. Whereas now, whether it's Azure or AWS, it's like, let me get a little bit of database, click, and now now I've just 100%. I can start creating my schema and just using my schema. But it's not just the relational database. Now it's like, I've got this data lake concept, and I can aggregate over here and all that. So, and I remember myself reading the Kimball method books of data warehousing, and just the OLTP versus OLAP when they were design patterns for databases. But now you got these cloud products which kind of espouse the different design patterns. So for I would say the generalist developer, what are the concepts that every developer just needs to know? What's the state of the database in 2025? Because there's like 20 different data storage and database products out there, and it's just too many. We kind of have to force ourselves to narrow down the concepts and say, okay, do you still need a relational database of some sort? Do you still need a document database of some sort? Do you still need a data aggregation, data warehouse, reporting data of some sort? Well, where does the analytics fit in? And then, okay, what products are just go-tos for that versus all of the marketing language of maybe what the big vendors want the next new product to be? And how do we sort that out?
Fabric.
What do you think?
Have you heard about Fabric? Like, what's this Fabric
thing? Right, yeah, exactly. A lot of listeners have no idea like what the heck that even is.
Do you actually know it's still in Fabric yet? No, I'm kidding. I'm sorry.
Honestly, no. It's like, so, until you put something significant in production, using it, like, it's hard to know the ins and outs of like, okay, what is this thing actually good at? When should I reach for it? And when did I reach for it? And I really didn't need this.
100%. I think, I'd be interested to hear, obviously you're interacting with a lot of clients and just their individual, kinds of products. Certainly different types of data may necessitate various levels of data management, document or relational, and a mix of all the above. I think that where the struggle was maybe 10 years ago, 12, 15 years ago was, we had some of these things available, but it was not terribly easy to interface between them, build an application that, they could seamlessly work together to do the job that they did well without getting in the way of the other thing, right? So, hey, I need relational data because that is still just the way the human brain works most of the time. Right?
Yeah.
When we just need that business data, it makes sense. It's the way that we interact with almost everything in our computers, rows and columns and grids. But there's a lot of reason to use something fast and quick and simple like a document database, but using them together for a long time was just a pain, right?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't easy to do without a lot of development in between. And I think that's where that's why I guess I'm seeing a lot of the work being done right now, either to maybe improve one side of that to accomplish more of each of those things, or a platform like Fabric, right? Or whatever that platform is that says, hey, what we're doing for you now is we're providing that easier interface layer across the document when it makes sense and the relational when it makes sense, and how to aggregate into your rollups in a way that doesn't match either of those things. Now, is it being done in a way that everyone understands yet? I don't think so, right? It's because it's still new and everyone's still trying to figure out, kind of like AI, when are we going to hit the right formula for this thing to be really useful? So I think that's been like, I saw that trouble a lot 10 years ago. I have all of these things, but interfacing between them is just really, it's a pain. So one of the applications I was with, actually the company I went to for Postgres, real-time data analytics, like literally getting readings from a sensor across, hundreds of thousands across the globe every 5, 10, 15 seconds in some cases. And so, most of that data went into a document store, but of course the relational data went somewhere else. And then we had to have roll-up data that was a mix of both.
Yeah.
And at that time, there was nothing that could do all that. And so then we are using, Postgres here, Cassandra here. We decided to use, Redshift at the time, because that's all of our stuff was in AWS. And even in so then we had to figure out, okay, well, there kind of is this way to work between Postgres and Redshift, but it turns out it doesn't work very well right now. And so that's another issue. So yeah, I think that's why I'm interested in how, the Fabric or the answer to those things in the other platforms. I think that's the goal. And I think they're being successful in some areas. So see what people are doing. But
well, with just the idea between Postgres and SQL Server, some people might think, oh, okay, I can stick either one of them in Azure. If I'm using Azure, well, it's just a different button click and boom, I got a Postgres, or boom, I got a SQL Server. And pretty much Entity Framework, if your .NET code is on top of Entity Framework, it's just a configuration setting, and then maybe some nuance differences for some of the different scenarios. But for those who literally have never even played with Fabric, like you mentioned, what would cause someone to say, you know what, let me maybe use Fabric? What is it good at where you say, let me reach for that instead of SQL Server or Postgres?
I'll be very upfront that I'm not using Fabric a ton at this point. I mean, we are playing with it internally because of Redgate and tools we do. And, I would point people a lot. I love what Eugene Meidinger is doing. I'm sure Eugene, probably a lot of your listeners do too. I mean, he's starting a podcast this year. I think it's going to launch really soon about Fabric and Power BI. And so, I mean, what I'm seeing, and as I've been talking to people and what we're observing about it, is the reality that, very much like Synapse, there's always going to be that core of, Fabric in and of itself still is going to relate and still is going to be built for the most part on top of a relational model at some part of the full application. And I think it's the melding of what used to be all of these separate pieces, reporting services and SSIS, and bringing it into a framework that has a richer API for doing the management, a richer UI for doing those things. So if you are a cloud first application company and you need that reporting consistent roll up, and maybe it's not it's not Databricks or it's not Snowflake for you right now. It's something that you want to build on top of the solid thing you have now in SQL Server. I think there's a real opportunity to get the power of, what Fabric does is give you that data, give you access to that data in a richer way through things like Power BI then, and helping you, kind of maybe your next level. I guess what I've seen for companies that are really trying it, it's like trying to build the next level of intelligence on top of your data without necessarily going to an entirely separate thing like Snowflake and Databricks and so forth. Because that in and of itself brings a whole nother measure of complexity. And so I think that would be, I don't see it necessarily as pick SQL Server, Postgres over Fabric. I think the Fabric is, trying to bring together those tools that as a Microsoft community we've known and used a lot, but just kind of in silos over the years, hey, I know how to do this, so I'm going to do that piece of it, and I know this. And so I think bringing it together, I think they're working hard at it, and I think they're doing a good job with it. So
yeah. So what I'm gleaning is that I'm not terribly behind that it's very early for this
it's
technology.
Yeah, it's still early.
Great. That's what most listeners need to hear. It's like, okay,
It's
I've
going to
heard of
keep
this
being
thing.
early.
It's early. Some dust needs to settle, as opposed to, oh, shoot, I haven't used this yet. I'm way behind.
No, I think that we joke internally. I'm not going to name any names here, but there are some folks internally that your folks might know who we have some fun conversations about the various technologies. It doesn't matter where it is. It's not a Microsoft thing, Amazon. It's just, hey, there's always something new happening. And I think what I do like about what Microsoft has done with the Fabric thing in particular is, they are getting it out there and they're letting people use it, right? And so some people are going to jump in and they're going to find some of the things that are not polished yet. And so I like that approach to it because we can't waste time. I think I said maybe this is another factor of it, and I haven't thought about it this much to really say this as an authoritative comment, but it's on my mind. I'm going to say
Sure.
it. One of the advantages I see to Postgres, and I continue to say this, is the reality that I actually was spending yesterday, like at any moment, I can pull up a web tab, browser tab, and I can go to the website that literally shows me what is currently this moment today in development across the globe, right? What people are contributing, what patches. Now, do most people want to do that? No one does. But there's some of us that just enjoy seeing the conversation or getting overwhelmed by the conversation. And so there's just a cadence of new updates, new features, and that is easier with an open source project like this than maybe something like SQL Server that still is a 2 to 3 year cadence of like new big things.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Fabric, those kinds of interfaces, those kind of tools working together, that gives that opportunity for more iteration faster without having to necessarily deal with the rock solid nature of, hey, SQL Server 2022, and now it's going to be that for 2 or 3 years kind of thing. So it's another approach to having access to new stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of .NET developers who still haven't even tried out Postgres, and there's been a lot of advancements in running Postgres locally in a little Docker container, or click a button and run a command, and now you've got it in Azure. And is Postgres, just for let's say entity framework development for .NET developers, is it just a one-for-one swap out the connection string and pretty much entity framework would be just as happy, or are there some scenarios where .NET developers need to adjust?
Oh, that's a great question. From a .NET perspective, using entity framework, if it's a new project, quite honestly, there's not going to be a lot. If you are just .NET entity framework, you're not doing much management in the back end and worrying about what's being created, the MPG SQL data connector for EF does a really excellent job at taking your data types and creating the tables and columns and everything you need out of it. What you'll find, however, is that, Postgres, so yes, that will work. Querying data, saving data, again, from an entity framework perspective, will generally just work. Is it going to be as performant? Depends on the model, depends on the query, because it does work differently under the covers at the core. I think the hardest thing comes, and we've been having this conversation about migrating from SQL Server to Postgres existing projects. In fact, there's going to be a series fairly soon on Simple Talk. I think there's Aaron Kutzell has been writing a long form, like multi-part series about taking AdventureWorks and creating as exact a copy as possible in Postgres that's working. And so we've been working on that article with him, and it's been fun to see him, really dive into that. But there just are, so as you go through that, you recognize there are a lot of nuances once you get past entity framework, right? So a quick example is, and this is again one of those aha moments for me 6.5 years ago when I came back to Postgres, I had a new developer who was doing a new feature. And she was young and she was, just her first job. And she really was just doing, hey, I need this. And so this looks like this data type's an array. I need an array of things. So she created a data object, and one of the properties was an array. And about 2 weeks later, I get, hey, why isn't this working? And I go into the database and I said, what is this? Oh, there's an array data type column in Postgres. Like this is an actual array. What's going on? And so, what would have happened in Entity Framework with that would have been some kind of list, which would have been transferred into, because SQL Server doesn't have an array.
Mm-hmm.
And so would have some other type of data point would have happened. Well,
or a one-to-many
that changes
table.
how you write one-to-many table. It totally changes how you would have written the query, how you would have stored the data. But EF didn't complain. He said, "Oh,
yeah, I can do this.
All right, well, just create the array. I can do that any day." And so I think those nuances are where it's, there's going to be learning. Once you get beyond Entity Framework, there's just a lot to just level set what you know and what it is in Postgres. And so we have been, at Redgate, we've been working hard over the last 2 years trying to provide some of that content. We have a Postgres 101 series on YouTube that probably has 10 or 11 episodes at this point, talking about those things: indexes, data types, query planning, terminology. What is it called in Postgres when it's called this in SQL Server, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll plug our book. We talked about this at PASS. Grant and I just, by the time folks listen to this, it may be released. It's called Introduction to PostgreSQL for the Data Professional, and it's by Ryan Booz and Grant Fritchie. And so we released a preview copy at PASS Summit this year because we just weren't quite done with a few parts of the book. And so the actual book is, we just put it up to the publisher 2 days ago, and I think February 3rd is the official release date on Amazon when it will ship. So again, our approach there was, you are a data professional. You have experience. It's just a matter of understanding what it is here. It's not a 600-page how to be a full DBA in Postgres. It's a how to get going, and the big main things: backups, backups and restores, and what does users and groups and roles look like, and what does query planning look like, and configuration. And so the main topics to kind of get you up to speed.
Nice.
So that's been a lot of fun to work through.
Nice.
Hard. Writing a book is hard.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. There's quite a bit of talk in the WebAssembly world and in the just client JavaScript frameworks and Blazor client-side frameworks about how to store data locally on the client in the browser, and SQLite is one of those things. Is Postgres playing in that space of micro database, or an IoT system on a chip, or in client browsers as well?
I haven't heard of anybody. So there's two developments in the last couple of years. As a lightweight backend store, none that I know of. There are implementations of WebAssembly versions of Postgres that will run in a browser so that you can use it, in a runtime. And so one of the Crunchy Data is a Postgres company, and they have what's called the Postgres Playground. And so you can go to it might be postgresplayground.org or com. We can put it in maybe show notes or something, and it's just a way you can literally, it boots up an environment and it has sample data sets, and you can walk through learning how to create and query Postgres. So yeah, there's some examples of that. There are a couple companies that are working to provide and really invest in kind of the micro database side of things for edge computing. So again, in my previous life, having sensors that are reading machine data in the Arctic while they're drilling for oil, those are not easy to get data from, right? So there's a local data store, and it was really challenging for us to have one that worked well, that would store what we needed, and then could easily replicate back to a central database. And so there are a couple companies working on that, and there's some really neat developments. PG Edge is one of them, and it'd be interesting to see where they're at. I haven't talked to the team in a while, but I see a lot of promise in at least kind of I don't know. It's actually a good question, because I don't know where the SQL Server version, kind of the Edge version of SQL Server one, that was a project a while ago. I don't know that I don't know anyone that's necessarily using it, but
well, for just file-based access, I like the way SQL Local DB works, and so like with the
100%.
Wilderness Labs Meadow F7 chips, I mean it's .NET native. It's built for all .NET code, all the .NET libraries to work on it.
That's right.
And so So really, you just give it a file path and it connects. And yeah, just the use case. If I need 10 tables and maybe a dozen records or a couple dozen records in each of those tables, just to mirror, the structure of a schema that's in a much larger database back on the server side, then it saves a whole lot of code just to be able to reuse the same code and the same structure, but just on a very, very micro scale, as opposed to just having to redevelop it in a different way to store some data.
It's a great point. Yeah, I don't know of anyone that's doing that level at that kind of project right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to look more. But
when these IoT devices are getting bigger and bigger or more capable, and as soon as one of those, and they might already happen, as soon as one of those can run 2 Docker containers as opposed to just like a single program. And I know that's probably not the little tiny microchips, but you get large ones that can actually do some containerization. Well, boom, now you got your little Postgres container. It just happens to be a tiny database, but it seems like inevitable that these IoT devices that came out with, it could only run, there's no operating system, it runs your program and that's kind of it, versus maybe the listeners can tell me if there's already one that runs a Docker host of some sort.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been doing a lot more still with the older. My son actually has recently been getting into some development. He's a young teenager, and so we've been doing more Arduino stuff lately again. And it's like, I should get back to some Pis and see kind of where the Pi 5 is at and how much it can and can't do. And you're right, it's coming, right? There's got to be that opportunity. It's just the optimizations have gotten so much better. Even if Postgres is a 35-year-old or 30-year-old code base, there's been so many developments as there have been in everything else. So it's much more efficient in areas than it was even 5 years ago. And be cool. Well, I love containers. I mean, just help make things easy, fast, and especially for learning.
Right. Stuff. Well, Redgate has made a significant investment in Postgres, and so there's some analysis on that side. And I want to ask like a chicken and egg question. In your opinion, is it that, hey, you guys have recognized that there's a massive market, and so you want to serve that market, or is it a prediction of the future type of calculus? Because Redgate has, I wouldn't say bet the farm, but they've made significant investments in Postgres, whereas earlier on in the company it was SQL Server.
I'm going to give my opinion. This is not an official Redgate statement. I know that I've been here for just over 2 years, and I would say that as a former Redgate client for many years, I mean, I started using products in 2009, I think. What I saw publicly, both from the company and from folks like Steve and Grant and others, is exactly who the company is. And it's been a real joy to like show up and see that they believe in what they do. They believe in helping clients. And so I think what was happening is not so much initially predict the future. I think they were recognizing there is a lot of the current customer base is beginning to see value, and we have been able to provide a lot of help over the years and wanted to continue to do that. And the easiest way to do that was through something like Flyway, right? We have this data comparison technology that is, a decade and a half or more in the making.
Mm-hmm.
And if we could get, more easily do that across multiple platforms, a lot of people will gain value from it. And so I think that was part of it. And then absolutely that then becomes we want to be able to serve that in the long term. Like we believe in what we do and we want to do that. So I think that's where it started. And I think that's a lot of our development now. We're really trying to, as I help the teams invest in, how to take products like Monitor and effectively do that in Postgres and Flyway and what a schema looks like. We're now we're at a level where we're accomplishing or dealing some advanced issues. And so we're making a lot of progress. That's super fun. I do think that maybe in the last year and a half or two, there's a growing consensus, and this is not just a Redgate thing. I think there's a growing consensus that is Postgres going to be the database of the future 100%? Like, okay, it depends which crowd you go to.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's an environment of collaboration, development, and extensibility that no other data platform yet has been able to replicate. And I think that is allowing innovation at a pace that other databases aren't. Does that mean SQL Server is going to be obsolete? Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
The team's amazing. They're going to do great stuff, but it allows kind of that conversation about fabric. I think that's where I see Postgres, really innovating right now, and the companies around it is not just can Postgres iterate quickly. Vector databases are a big thing, right? We're all talking about vectors and large language models. Well, there are three or four, three at least, vector extensions for Postgres being actively developed by different companies, in some cases collaboratively between large companies like AWS and Microsoft and Google and so forth. And so we can iterate and literally have a Postgres database that's a vector database and, do something now rather than wait a year or two. And I think being able to iterate on those things that allows everyone else to see what's going to work and what's not going to work, what kind of indexes are best, what kind of, what kind of specific use case these things are going to be best for in a relational database model. So that's where I think, I think that's where the niche still is. And I think it's going to continue to really help the overall data community in learning. So,
well, and before we go, just because you mentioned it, I want to make sure we define it for the listeners. In physics, a vector is two things. It has a direction and a magnitude. And so when you say a vector database, for the listeners who have no idea what the heck a vector database is, what do you think the simplest explanation of that is?
Well, and I'm going to say this to you now, and again, I'm assuming there's show notes, so we can put it in the show notes. There's literally last week a great article by Crunchy. Some of my friends at Crunchy wrote a great article about vector databases, and I love that they open the article with a graphic. And it's like, here are the 5 different meanings of vector, depending on if you're in mathematics or if you're in databases, if you're, I was like, wow, that's perfect. So yes, it'd be great just to even see that graphic. But in databases, the concept of vector is really essentially just an array of values that have some kind of meaning. And so when it comes to large language models and what we're able to do in databases, we can take data. It could be, text data in a column. It could be whatever's in your database. It could be image data. It could be binary data. It could be things that there are formulas for getting what we call embeddings. So it's a way of representing that object of data, whatever it is, into a series of numbers, quite honestly. And the numbers can be a series of, at the low end, a couple hundred numbers up to thousands of numbers, thousands of embeddings. And then what we're able to do through various indexes and new query operators and things like that, we can basically start to do that inference kind of querying. When I talk about this movie over here that has these actors, it's kind of like it's not old school, but the kind of nearest neighbor or oh my goodness, the AI model that's escaping me right now. It's a more automatic, more embedded way of doing that kind of querying. And so you're not having to necessarily make those correlations yourself. You're letting the embeddings with the models and the various index types help you find those relationships and bring some of that predictive and data to the forefront. So the biggest hitch, and this is where so much of the development is happening right now, is when you talk about thousands of values in an array in millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of rows of data of that, you got to have indexes that can actually help you query it. And that is a really unique thing about Postgres is we have frameworks for creating essentially infinite index types, right? If you have a new data type, you can create an index type that best indexes that new data type. You're not stuck with B-tree. And so that's where the development's at. And it's been really fun to see how quickly we've gone from, it takes an hour to create an index to it takes 2 minutes to create an index. And like, oh my goodness, what's going on here? So
yeah.
That's what we mean by vectors. That's at its simplest form.
Awesome. We'll definitely include that Crunchy article in the show notes and everything else we talked about. Yeah. So listeners, if you want to get the links to the things that we talked about, just check out the show notes. And Ryan, thanks for coming back on the show and sharing with us what's going on in the database world beginning of 2025. I appreciate it.
Super fun. It's always good to just chat with you, Jeff. You're so easy to chat with. I love talking about data, and it's clear that you do as well, not just because you're clear measure. But.
Love it. All right, thank you. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.